this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to talk about how to play against orcs with Drukhari. First, we're going to talk about why orcs tend to really hard counter Drukhari. Then we're going to talk about the strengths of orcs and their weaknesses, units to look out for, and then strategies for playing against infantry heavy orcs and vehicle heavy orcs. Let's begin. The hard counter for Drukhari especially and Craft Worlds is going to be orcs, or at least one of the hard counters, and that's because Drukhari and elves in general very much play a trading game more than any other army. Their units need to be able to trade up and trade efficiently, much more so than other armies because of the way our units tend to specialize and be very good at one thing. And if we lose those tools before we get to use them, it can really hamper our abilities in the game. Orcs having T5 does matter a lot right now in the state of the game. Most melee either went down in strength or went down in AP or both. Like power fists are now -2, but they're still strength 8, for example. Power claws for orcs went down to strength 9. So there are some shifts that have happened in melee that have caused T5 to matter more than it did later in 9th and earlier in 9th. In addition to that, units of boys are just super cheap. You can get 21 wounds of OC2 for 170 points or 210 for the same, but it comes with a 6 up feel no pain baked in. That should be 3 plus signs, sorry. The Pain Boy or Pain Boss can attach to one of those units and give the unit a 5 plus feel no pain. And then in addition to that, it can revive D3 models once per game, and that can actually make boys a little bit more durable than you'd expect. And they're honestly a bit more durable than you'd expect right now anyway. With a lot of AP going down in a lot of armies, even in shooting and melee, and boys going to a 5 up save, 4 up if they have cover, that means they're getting to roll saves a lot more often than they used to, and their dice are better. So if you have cover and you have a 4 up save, that means you have a 50% chance of saving against a bolt gun, for example. So it's one of those where they just got a little bit more resilient and a little bit tougher, and then being able to take an army-wide feel no pain, bumping it to a 5 with certain characters, it just means that they're going to stick around a little longer and make playing that trading game hard. They can also just flood the table with cheap units that can be tough to shift. Multiple MSUs, for example, like 10-man boy squads are 65 or 85 points. And if you flood the table with 4 or 5 of those and just hop them on objectives, you can create a lot of decision paralysis. Players will look at that and they might not necessarily know where to begin because they just see the flood of bodies and get overwhelmed. Strengths for the army, like I said before, the units tend to be cheap and they trade well because they have throwaway units. They have those 10-man units of Gretchen that they can push forward. They have those 10-man units of boys that they can throw in your face. They have one of the deepest codexes in the game. And they really do. I think it's probably, I'm guessing here, but it's probably the 3rd or 4th largest. It's hard to tell, especially if you're taking into account Forge World, because certain armies just have a larger Forge World index. But it is one of the largest in the game. And that means you really can't know what to expect when you run into them. You could hit literally anything. You could hit a shooting army, a melee army, an every phase army. You could hit a castle army. You could hit a advance and charge mobility army. There's a lot of flexibility in their play styles, and it can just make it tough to kind of game plan for those games. Generally, they don't have a ton of standout units, but they also don't have really a lot of trash units. Everything kind of has a purpose, and really they've generally always been that way. They might have a couple units that are really good. Like right now, Flash Gets and Badruck, that combo is really good. But at the same time, they don't really have anything that's like so oppressively good that it's an auto include in every list. And then they don't have a ton of trash units either. So right now, in my opinion, the worst units in that index are going to be either Ludas or uh, Tank Bustas. Tank Bustas, it's just the way the unit's comprised. They still have a purpose and a function. Ludas, because they're ballistic skill 6 with heavy, so they have to sit still just to hit on 5s. And really, like, that's an inherent flaw with the way the heavy rule is written. And it just means that, generally speaking, they'll never be able to hit on 4s. And their guns are not that good. They're strength 8, -1, 2 damage, if I remember right. So it's not like they're very scary. Many of the vehicles will have a 6-up invuln, and that's really what Ramshackle has turned into for the index, is just the things that had it basically will have a 6-up invuln. And it's not crazy effective, but when you have a 4-up save, having a 6-up invulnerable save is infinitely better than not having it when you're facing things like Dark Lances or Meltas or things of that nature. Things that will punch straight through your armor save normally, knowing that you're going to still get to roll a die is literally infinitely better than not rolling a die. They can drown units in dice, and with easy access to +1 to hit in the fight phase, they can be surprisingly efficient, and they will get stuck in. Like, that is an orc phrase for a reason. They will get stuck in. You will sit there. You will have prolonged combats. If the orc player can have it their way, you are going to just have drawn out combats that are going to last multiple turns. Even if they lose every orc boy, their plan isn't to win the fight. Their plan is to just tie you up and tar pit you. They do have deceptive speed because most orc builds right now, especially, are very melee centric. A lot of their units are just going to be advancing early game, so they can cover that ground faster. They need to get into position faster so that they're not getting destroyed immediately. And so, they are going to advance. They'll cover that ground faster than you expect. When they declare the WA, they're going to have an army-wide advance in charge. So they're going to get stuck in faster than you realize because most orc players are just advancing with every unit turn 1, or at least most of their units turn 1. They also have really good strat support. The two standouts are going to be any non-vehicle, non-Gretchen unit can get -1 to wound, and then you can give any unit exploding 5s in melee. So again, they're very good. Beast Naga boys will drown heavy vehicles in enough dice that you can do a lot of damage. Remember that they're going to be strength 6 on the WA, so only T12 is going to get wounded on 6s. Everything else is going to get wounded on 5s. So you can actually, and I've done it, I destroyed a Doomsday Arc with a squad of 20 boys by popping 5s explode and then just having re-rolls against vehicles and fishing for 5s and just drowning that thing in enough dice that it just died. So it is possible. They will be efficient through weight of dice. Like, they're not efficient dice, but you just get so many that you can literally drown units in them. Weaknesses of the army: while their durability did go up, it's still not crazy. A lot of feel no pains in the index, but not a lot of invulns without character support. They do get the once per game invuln from declaring their WA, so any kind of high AP or ignore cover will help. Most infantry just have a 5-up save, with knobs, bikes, and mega knobs being some of the few units that have better. High qualities of low AP dice will chew through infantry, and then high AP dice will chew through their elite infantry, because, like I said, most of them won't have an invuln. The Mega Knobs probably will, because I think most people, if they have Mega Knobs, are going to take the Big Mech and put it in there. It gives them a 4-up invuln, and they just get to put a Mega Knob back every turn. They don't really have a ton of reliable shooting. Mechs can give a model +1 to hit for shooting. Big mechs can give reroll 1s, but it's only to vehicles. So a unit of mech guns or killicans can hit on 4s, rerolling 1s. The mech that gives the +1 to hit, it's only one specific model. So you can have one vehicle model that's +1 to hit. So be wary of that. Most of the guns aren't super scary. Like, custom mega cannons will do work. They're strength 12, -2 AP, D6 damage, but they're not terrifying because of their low accuracy. LFR will help save a lot of your stuff because the -1 to hit will knock them either back to 5s or 6s, and that's really going to help you out a lot. Even though I said they're deceptively fast, they are slow. So once they burn out that advance in charge, you can just outrun them a lot of times because they're only moving 6 inches for most all of their infantry outside of the jump pack boys. And then, like I said, ballistic skill 5 just means that lightning fast reactions is going to be one of your best friends for keeping your units alive. If you've got somebody who's shooting at you with a mech gun, for example, the shock assault gun, You can make it hit on 6s. You can make mech guns hit on 5s. You can make killicans hit on 5s. You can make tank busters hit on 6s. So you have a lot of quality, like LFR has a lot of quality applications against this army to help save you. The downside is that their Overwatch is going to be about as effective as their shooting. So knowing that their Overwatch can chew through your bodies, you'll have to also be aware of that. Units to look out for: the Beast Boss on Squigosaur. He is T10, 5 up Invuln, 4 up Feel No Pain. He's a monster, not a vehicle. He does have 9 wounds. They're very stout and durable. They do hit pretty hard, and a lot of players are running 2 to 3 of them from what I've seen, and that's because they're fairly cheap at 165 points. However, they do only move 10 inches, and they can't hide. There's no lone operative or attaching it to a unit, so if you see it, you can shoot it. So it is a prime target for things like your Dark Lance. Now, it can get the benefit of the -1 to wound strat because it's not a vehicle or a Gretchen unit. And at T10, that means it can force your heat guns and dark lances to wounding it on 4s. So it can really sap the efficiency of your shooting. And on that note, you really have to just look out for any Snaga unit. Squighog boys are T7 and 3 unit. Squighog boys are T7 and 3 wounds with a 5 up Feel No Pain and a 10-inch move, so they will absorb a lot more punishment than they probably should. They are a great target, again, for your Dark Lances and for your Heat Lances and stuff like that. Your anti-tank can chew through them pretty well because it'll knock them off their save, and then you'll roll enough damage dice that you should be able to at least kill a single model every time you shoot at them. The infantry have a baked-in 6-up Feel No Pain. They can take a pain boss for a 4-up, or for a 5-up Feel No Pain. The Kill Rig has a 6-up Feel No Pain, and the Kill Rig can give out a +1 strength and lethal hits to a squad within 12 inches, and that will stack on to their sustained hits that they already get in the fight phase. So Kill Rigs are a good buff unit. If you can, take those out early so that they can't sit there and just stack bonus on bonus on bonus. Other units to look out for: you need to be watchful of bikes. They will be able to match your speed and aggression. They will throw a lot of dice in the fight phase, and because we have T3 infantry bodies, they will do a lot of damage. The knobs are T6, 4 wounds, and a 6-up invuln, and they sit around 40 points a model. They have a lot of different loadout options, so it's really hard to say what your opponent's going to bring. I personally like the Power Stabber because it gives you Lance, which is +1 to wound on the charge, and they're strength 8. So they are going to be pretty good. They're strength 8, -1, 2 damage. They go to strength 9 on the wah. So it's one of those where that's a very good weapon. They get a lot of dice. You could put a boss in there to give them +1 to hit, so they'll hit on 3s. A lot of the knobs weapons hit on 4s inherently. Regular Warbikers just have choppas, and they do throw a lot of dice. They're also 3 wounds, 4 wounds for the sergeant. And like I said, they can just match our aggression. They move 12. They auto advance 6 if they've got a boss. You can give the boss an enhancement to add 2 inches to their movement, so they can zoom up the board at 14 inches. And then their guns are assault, so they can do actions and they can shoot. And their guns throw a lot of dice. So they can just drown you in buckets of dice in the hopes that they just chew through your infantry body. So bikes are another unit that you need to look out for because that's a unit you're not going to be able to outrun very well. Burnas or anything else with flamers like knobs with scorches, another thing to look out for. They're going to hurt you very badly because they just auto hit and it bypasses the poor ballistic skill of the army. And again, it's usually just a lot of dice. And then Storm Boys, really because they're just bikes with the infantry keyword. They do almost everything the bikes do except shoot, and they fly, and they're infantry. So they're just exceptionally good. And they're cheap. So that's another unit to keep an eye out for. And I know it seems like I've picked a lot, but like I said, this is one of the deepest books in the game. And these are going to be the things that you as an elf player need to be wary of because these are the things that are going to hurt you the most. Other things to remember: they're still just orcs. They can and will die to low AP attacks. Their battle shock and leadership still isn't great, so trying to force that can benefit you. Incubi, that can really benefit you. Your witches don't force battle shock, but if you can get a couple 5-man squads of witches stuck in with some boys to prevent fallbacks, that could be good. Again, there's a lot of utility here, so we'll kind of dig into that in a little bit. And outside of the vehicles, there's not very many invulns, so all your high rend stuff like your Dark Lances is going to do a lot of work. Battle Wagons are a little tough to chew through because they reduce incoming AP, but at the end of the day, they're not inherently scary, and they're very high in points right now. They don't really have advance and charge outside of the WA, so if you can bait it early, you can really hamper the mobility of the army. And then don't get overwhelmed by the numbers. Use your speed and your efficiency to your advantage. If you're playing into infantry heavy orks, you want to push forward with the cheapest and worst units you have available to you. So you want 5-man rack units, 5-man Cabalite units, splinter rifles, etc. Like the cheap stuff that you can break up and throw out in front. You want to push those up far so that you can maybe bait that turn 1 WA out, have your throwaway units get thrown away, and then have your counterattacks really do a lot of work. If you can keep your stronger, more expensive pieces back and protect your ass, you're going to be in a good spot. If there's a weird boy, you will need to know where he's at all times. You don't want him teleporting into your back line, because if he jumps into your back line, he can use Here We Go in the movement phase to give them +1 movement +2 movement +2 charge. So he can teleport into your back lines, have a 7-inch charge onto an objective, and really just create a lot of havoc for you. You want to try to keep that weird boy in front of you at all times. Cut the board in half and give the other half to the opponent if that's possible. Again, if you spread out and try to play the whole table, orks will punish you for it. They have more units, they can flood the table, they will just drown you in dice. So you want to just give them half the table and then take the other half and then try to sweep around and come back on them. Personally, I play for turn 3. That's when I kind of hit my gear and start going. My turns 1 and 2, you'll see a little bit of combat or shooting, but it's a lot of motion and positioning. Turn 3 is really when I start to catch traction and my game starts to speed up and pick up. Now, I'm not saying that's the best way to play. That's just what works for me. And that might help for you also as you play this army, is to just plan for turn 3 to be the turn that you start getting stuck in and doing a lot of your damage. Don't get disheartened if you're not doing much turn 1 and turn 2. Play for turn 3, 4, and 5, and I feel like you're going to do a lot better with your army. If they're going to advance at you out the gate, expect it. You know, that's what they're going to do. They're going to roll that die. They're going to get as far as they can. And that's why you're bubble screening with your smaller, cheaper units. That's why your 5-man racks are so important. Once the WA is gone, remember that mobility drops substantially. If they keep advancing, they won't be able to charge after they declare the WA. They do have a 5s explode strat. Just let it happen most of the time. Honestly, what's going to happen is they're going to drown you in so many dice that they're probably going to kill whatever they charge anyway. We don't stand up to fights. We need to hit first, so if you get caught in a position where they can use the strat, I wouldn't get too worked up about it. I'd save the Archon ability for something like Art as Nails, because that'll take their durability way down. Also, remember that splinter rifles will supersede Art as Nails because it's a critical wound on a 3-up with your splinter weapons. Here We Go is also worth hitting with the Archon ability because, as I mentioned before, it gives +2 to move, +2 to charge rolls for a turn. And again, that can really slow down a unit. Now, we're going to take a quick look at a board, and I'll do a quick walkthrough to show you what I mean. This is our deployment zone, okay? And I'm just going to do this mission real quick just to show you what I mean. We know that the orks are over here, and we know that this distance right here is 18 inches. So we know that they're going to try to come through the middle of the board because that's the shortest route possible to get stuck in. So they're going to send some units up there, and that's fine. All you need to do is have something maybe here in the event that they have something you can see through this lane. And then you need to figure out, based on how they've deployed, which side of the table is better for you. Is this side better or is this side better? Are there faster units over here? If they are, then take this side. If their faster units are over here, then take this side. You want to be as far away from their faster units as you can be, simply so you can make them have to chase you. You don't want to give them free charges and free movement. You want to try to make them chase you. Now, if they try to take the middle of the board, if you go first, for example, boop, it may be worth running a unit of racks right here, or maybe even just like in the terrain somewhere, if you can, just to put a presence in the middle of the board. A 5-mana Cabalites is fine, especially if you've got like homers. Because again, if you can bait stuff to the middle of the board, you can use your mobility to your advantage. So if you've got Cabalites or something that come in here, and especially if you have homers, like if you take fixed objectives and you do homers, your opponent knows you're going to try and camp the middle of the board. So there's a good chance they try to start funneling units in to get rid of you. And what's going to happen is if you can draw them to the middle and then you've played right, you can play here, here, and then back in on them. That's what I mean when I say I play for turn 3, right? So like I'll pick half the table and I'll say, okay, this is my half. This can be your half. And I'll just start moving things out, you know, staying behind terrain as best I can. Like I might move a unit here. I might jump a unit back here if I've got the mobility. And I might not even worry about trying to shoot things turn 1, even if they give me targets, because I'm more worried about making sure my positioning is good. Like if they've got something here, I might put some scourges up here, throw some dice at it, and then use their 6-inch bounce to get back here. But if I can't, then they're not going out. I'm not leaving my scourges in the open if they started on the table. I just refuse to do it because I'm not going to pick them up without them interacting. And odds are my opponent isn't going to leave something out for me to just take from them. Right? So you want to bait stuff with your racks and your smaller units, and then you want to hide everything else as best you can. If you've got a raider or something with witches like Lilith or uh, incubi, you want to keep that way out of their reach for a turn or two. Even their shooting reach, you might start with it here and then bounce it up behind here, for example. You don't need them to get involved in the game turn 1. Just having them on the table can directly impact the course of a game. If your opponent knows that you've got Drazar and company in a raider ready to hit anywhere on this quarter of the table or the middle of the board, they will adjust their plans accordingly because Drazar does hit very hard. Now, they might put a battle wagon in here and just dare you to send Drazar, and at which point you don't send Drazar. You try to shoot it off the board with some Heat Lances or some Talos, stuff like that. Or you just give them the middle of the table, ignore the battle wagon, and continue to try to work around the board. Again, that is a strategy I've had that has worked very well. Playing against vehicle-heavy orcs, know where their flamers are. Some of the buggies have flamers. The custom Boosta Blasta, if they've got any kind of burn a unit, it's going to be in a truck. Always know where that stuff is. Also, know where the squig buggies are because they ignore line of sight and they can do a lot of work into your army. Remember that cans are an every phase unit. They have solid melee and solid shooting, but heat lances will wound them on 2s and dark lances will wound them on 2s, and you should be able to kill multiple cans in a shooting phase. They do have ballistic skill 4 shooting, so their return fire is going to be pretty solid. And depending on what the loadout is on the can, they're going to have a high enough volume that there's a good chance somebody might try to overwatch you with them. Even if they have 5 rockets in a unit, it's still 5 D3 shots coming at you. So even hitting on 6s, they're going to get a couple through. A fly is less powerful than it was. Having it is still better than not having it. Always try to use it to your advantage. Always try to position your stuff in a way that you can use fly to get away and escape. Scourges, Ravagers, and Talos are going to be very good in this matchup specifically. Talos are just going to do mortal wounds to vehicles, so it's just going to chew them up as long as you put the haywires on them. I know some people like the Heat Lances, and there's nothing wrong with that. I prefer the Haywire. I just want that anti-vehicle specifically. I like the volume it gives me, and I feel like it gives me a very good every phase interaction. Scourges, I prefer Heat Lances, but Dark Lances are still pretty good, and they'll wound almost all Orc vehicles on 3s or 2s. Wagons with a hard case, RT12, and there's a couple other things that are, but most of the time, your Dark Lances are still going to be okay. And like I said before, Haywire will just shred the smaller buggies. You know, you're going to do 6 to 9 mortal wounds from a unit of 2 Talos. So it's one of those where it's very much worth just having a unit of 2 to be able to just one-shot vehicles or to cripple them. Jump, shoot, jump is going to help you out a ton. So your Scourges being able to shoot and then duck behind cover is going to be very, very beneficial, because you're going to want to either deep strike them in or move them out, shoot, and then hide them again. So just keep that in mind. Don't forget that that's an ability you have. Honestly, into vehicle heavy orcs, I'd probably play fixed objectives and just take bring it down. I know that Drukhari can score tactical well, but the way I personally play the game, I want to take as much thinking out of my game as possible. That doesn't mean I don't like tactical objectives, but it means if I'm playing a competitive game, if you've got 10 characters, I'm going to take Assassinate. Simply because now I just have to play the game. I don't have to rely on some subversive, cunning strategy to win. I just have to play the game to score my points. Same thing here. If they've got a ton of vehicles, you just take bring it down. You can find another secondary that you score well, and it just takes a lot of pressure off, and you just score points for playing the game. And I think it just makes it intrinsically easier for you, because you don't have to worry about what cards do I draw, what do I do next. You know that as long as you're killing vehicles, you're getting points. A lot of the buggies actually move really fast. They don't live super long, but they will cover a lot of ground. They have melee profiles, they have shooting profiles. Some of them have assault weapons, one of them has ignored line of sight. So the buggies are important targets. If you can pick them off early, you can hamper mobility very well. I would deep strike Scourges most games. I would consider strat reserving Talos, although it's going to largely depend on what my opponent's army looks like. If they have mech guns in the back or squig buggies, if you deep strike your Scourges or reserve your Talos or both, they're more likely to kind of hold back a little bit and be less aggressive, knowing that they need to protect those units from your reserves units from coming in and deleting them. And that's okay, because again, you don't need them to necessarily kill things. You need them to keep pressure off your army. If it does one, the other, or both, that's a win for you. Sometimes, like I said, it's just not about doing damage, but dictating the flow of the game. Let's head to the table and kind of look at what we're talking about. Okay, because I don't feel like giving you a new deployment zone, we're going to assume the other one, or the same one. So, like, if we've got a mech gun here, and then we've got a squig, actually, let's do it this way. Let's say we've got a squig buggy here, and let's say we've got a mech gun here, because this gap is wide enough that that mech gun can kind of hop it. So they could do that. Now I'm going to put my Scourges in reserves, and I'm going to put my Talos in reserves. And then what I'm going to do, or the Scourge is actually going to deep strike, but what I'm going to do is if I go second on my opponent's turn, I'm going to use, I forget what the strat's called, but it lets you come in on their turn instead of yours. And then what I'll do is, because it's at the end of their movement phase, if they leave me a pocket, I'm going to try to put them as close to these units as possible. Yeah, they can overwatch me, and that's fine. But if they don't leave me a pocket, I just don't come in. Like, if they hold back, that's fine. I just don't come in. You know, if they've got a lot of other buggies that give me some good targets, I can always come in and shoot those. That's also fine. But ultimately, anything that ignores line of sight, like a squig buggy, we need to get rid of. Mech guns, probably want to get rid of. If they're tractor cannons, they're just going to delete whole squads of our army. We need to be wary of those. If they're KMKs, custom mega cannons, which I think is what most people are going to run, they're going to do a lot of work also, because it's just a lot of dice. You're going to need to pick off these, like any squig buggies, any ignore line of sight. You want to get rid of those first. And then, like, if they just screen you to where you can't come in, take the targets they give you, but be smart about it. If they put a battle wagon in the middle of the board, but then they've got a scrap jet over here, take the scrap jet over the battle wagon. The battle wagon's not scary. Now, it might have units inside that make it scary, but the wagon itself is not scary. They move a little slower. They do interact in every phase if they have guns in them, but they're almost 200 points. So it's one of those where they're nowhere near as efficient as the squig buggies or the scrap jets or the things like that. So if you can, and those a lot of those buggies are going to move 12 to 14 inches. So if you can peel them, that's even better. And they'll have at 90 to 110 points a model. They're going to have so many dice in shooting. A lot of them, like the custom Boosta Blasta, I forget how many dice it gets now. In 9th edition, it was 4d6 auto hits. It might only be 2d6 now, but they're twin linked. And then the rivet cannon does a lot of things for their army. The scrap jets have rockets and big shooters, so it's a lot of dice. So again, you want to pick those cheaper units. It sounds counterintuitive, but you want to pick those cheaper units that throw a lot of dice, because those are the units that are going to shred your army more efficiently and more effectively. We're going to wrap this up. I know I didn't cover it in the intro, but we're going to talk about bike heavy orcs. We're not going to hit the table on this one at all. We're just going to talk about it. This is going to be our toughest matchup, and that's because they can damn near match our speed and really in some instances outpace us depending on how we've built our armies. The bikes are really, really good, and splinter rifles are going to be very worthless into them because they're not infantry. You're going to need Drazar and Incubi. You're going to need Scourges, and you're going to need a lot of the shooting things like to really step up the game. If you've got Grotesques in your army, they're going to be okay. They're not ideal because you're still wounding on 5s instead of 4s because the bikes are all T6. Shredders will wound them on 4s, and they have a 4-up save, so you could really chip a lot of wounds with Shredders. Splinter Cannons aren't reliable, but if you can get Splinter Cannons through, you can kill them very quickly. Blasters and Dark Lances will decimate them. They do have a 6-up invuln, but it's basically going to be invuln or die in most situations. And same with Heat Lances. You are going to lean on LFR a lot because each bike throws so many dice. Each bike will have a twin DACA gun, which within 9 inches will get 5 shots each, and they're twin linked, so they'll reroll wounds. So a unit of 5 will throw 25 dice that are strength 5, 0 AP. Well, it'll be neg 1 AP in half range. So it's one of those where they will do a lot of work into our infantry, and their melee is about the same. So it's just a lot of dice. So these bikes, first things to go if you see them on the table, same with Storm Boys, because they move 12, they can advance and charge once per game. The bikes will auto advance 6, so they can just get 18 inches. The Storm Boys can advance and charge all game, but they can take mortal wounds every time they do it. So that's another unit, though, that you need to keep your eye on. LFR, like I said, is going to really help keep your army on the table against the bike shooting, because 25 dice hitting on 5s is way scarier than 25 dice hitting on 6s. It doesn't sound like a big difference, but it will be a big difference. Racks and Grotesques, going to be important there. Access to the Feel No Pain and -1 to wound. You'll be able to tar pit a lot of their mobile units, and if you can jam up their mobile units with things like a 10-man unit of racks with a homunculus that have the 4-up Feel No Pain, you can -1 to wound them. You can take a lot of their efficiency out of the game, and you can tar pit them very well. And outside of the knobs, it's all 1 damage attacks. You can, in the orcs will be able to have a single unit that can fall back, shoot, and charge. So that's another thing to look out for if they have that enhancement. But if they're running bikes, they're gonna have that enhancement. If you can keep them stuck, that's just as good as killing. Because if you can clog them up for a turn or two, because the units are either 3 or 6 models, if you can clog them up for a turn or two while your other units get in position, that is just as good as killing them. And that's where cutting the board in half is going to be harder, but more important. As they move 12 inches, They don't fly, so you're going to need to still position well so you can use your fly to your advantage. There's going to be spots where you're going to be able to jump terrain if you positioned well, and they're just not going to be able to keep up with you. Your venoms are going to be important here because of the amount of dice that they can throw. Your fire and fade with units is going to be important here. If you're running into bikes, I would strongly consider, if they plan on overwatching you, that would be a time to use your Archon ability on the overwatch. Otherwise, like I said, Art as Nails and Here We Go are going to be your top targets. Overwatch is your third. The bikes, just because of the amount of dice that they throw, that could be a prime target for it as well. If they're running a lot of bikes, the WH here could be absolutely soul crushing. When they have multiple units that'll be able to move 18 plus inches in charge, you are going to be on point with screening with 5-man or 10-man rack units to soak those charges and hopefully not get crushed under the weight of dice. You're going to need, like I said, 10 model rack units with a homunculus or 5 model rack units that you know are just going to die. Either one is fine. You just need to make sure that's what you're screening with. You don't want your Cabalites and your damage dealing units up front here. And I know we don't normally anyway, but you really need to protect them here. That mobility is going to surprise you. The first time you watch an Ork player charge you 18 plus inches with 3 to 5 units is going to be very eye-opening. And the only reason I know is because I've been on the Ork player side of it. When I was running Evil Sons, I would tell people all my bikes move 24 inches in charge when I declare my WA. And my opponents, every game, were like, yeah, man, that's pretty cool. And then when I did it, and then I was turn 1 or turn 2 in their deployment zone with half of my army, they were just like, oh, you say it, but when I see it, it's a different experience. So be mindful of that. Be cagey. Make sure you're staying well outside because it's not D6 advance, it's 18-inch advance if they have a character in that squad. I know it says we're going to take a look at the table, but this video is already getting very long, so we're going to skip it. I feel like you could probably visualize what I mean by a lot of this. The other thing I will say is mandrakes are going to be awesome in screening out also because the 5-man units of mandrakes are relatively cheap, and if they die, it's not the end of the world. And then their inherent stealth will keep them on the table, at least against the shooting attacks, a little bit longer against a ballistic skill 5 army. Overall takeaways, playing into Orks is not going to be an easy game. A skilled Ork player will hold an edge just because of their ability to play the trading game better. They have more units, their units are less good, which means they're more apt to just kind of not care when they die. And you're going to want to keep from spreading out and playing the whole table. And a lot of your melee units and hard-hitting units, you're going to want for counter charges and counter attacks, not for spearheading. You don't want to be the spearhead in this game. You want to use your cheaper throwaway units for baiting and then counterattacking. And it's going to be kind of a weird tactic if you're not used to it, but that's the way you need to play against them, in my opinion. That's going to wrap this up. Big shout out to the Immortals, Captain Too Tall, the real Donnie G, Lord Wellingstone, and Daniel Bodecker. You guys are amazing. I appreciate the support. There are links on the screen and links in the description. You guys have a great day.